Greetings, everyone. Welcome to another episode.
The Church of Lies!
Oh, yeah. Shit, I should have said that. Oh, my God. I missed it. We're starting over. Fuck this. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Church of Lies! Cranked and Ranked is the name of this podcast.
Professional,
it could be the Church
as
of
always.
Lies, I guess. We're back for another exciting episode and another band album ranking discography thingy times. Words sometimes don't come out the order they're supposed to come out, but that's okay.
A much shorter one.
So yes. So we just jumped off of doing Judas Priest, which took us 3 episodes to fully rank. We believe in giving these bands' discographies the time that they deserve and the discussions that they deserve. But today we're going to be doing a band with a smaller discography, and we're going to be taking a step back in to the land of thrash metal, which is pretty much where I live most of the time. And by the way, I'm Steven, a.k.a. Old Head, and with me, as always, is Mr. Eddie Sparks. Hello, sir.
Hey, how you doing?
I'm great, and I hope everyone out there is great, too, because we're going to be talking about a band that I think doesn't get as much recognition as they should. In fact, they are one of my favorite Bay Area thrash metal bands. We're going to be doing the discography of the band Forbidden, and Forbidden's a band that's been around since the mid-'80s, and I guess technically they're not around anymore. I don't think there was an official breakup of Forbidden, but they haven't put out an album in 10 years, and as far as I can tell, the vocalist, Russ Anderson, is not doing anything. I think he's a key element that he's not involved in wanting to do this shit, and so there you go. But let's not worry about that. We're going to talk about the amazing albums that they have given us, which is 5 full-length albums. Eddie and I are going to be ranking these. Now, this is an interesting one because last time I'm not a very big Judas Priest fan, so I had to really dive in and listen to all of their shit in order to do the episode. This time around, Forbidden's a band that I know pretty well. And Eddie, had you heard any albums by Forbidden prior to this?
I'd heard of the band, but never heard any of their stuff. So,
okay.
Yeah.
And that just goes to show you, Eddie is somebody that listens to a lot of music, especially a lot of metal from around the time that Forbidden was starting. So the fact that he hadn't heard these albums, that shows how underrated this band is, that there should be a lot more talking about it. And that's what we're going to do. So we're going to rank the 5 Forbidden albums from least amazing to most amazing.
I'd say there isn't a bad album here.
No, absolutely.
Everything I heard was great.
So I guess but no need to really beat around the bush here. We kind of have everything set up. So for those of you who like I said before, they're a Bay Area band, and they were around in the mid '80s, and they around the time that Testament was starting up and Death Angel and bands like that. And for some reason, they just don't get the love out there that other bands do. And I think that's weird because I think that they're way better than a lot of the bands that get a lot of chatter on the internets. So let's do it. You ready, sir?
I am ready.
All right, so let's start off, as usual, letting Eddie go first. Let's hear your number 5 pick for the Forbidden discography.
Okay, so my last pick, I liked it, but I didn't love it as much as the upper albums on this list. So for number 5, I've gone with Green. And,
wow.
Are you surprised?
I thought you would love this album.
I again, like I say, I really liked it, but not as much as everything else. But the stuff that I heard on there that you said I'd like, I did hear, which is good news.
Yeah, yeah. So Forbidden's an album where. So the first two albums are easily lumped in with thrash metal, and then the next two albums, Green being one of those two, is a little more on the '90s metal groove kind of side of things. Because Forbidden took a little bit of a turn into the '90s world there.
Yeah, yeah, and they really did play on the groove element. They pretty much shed. Well, this album, in comparison to the previous one, Distortion, I feel, still had some thrash on it. This one, however, very often, or very little, sorry, has any thrash on it. It's pretty much groove and or verging on new metal territory, never quite going over the full Korn Limp Bizkit route, but there is a definite kind of Machine Headness to this album. I love Machine Head.
It's funny that you say that because I don't know if you did any research here, but Rob Flynn started this band, but he isn't on any of the albums. He quit the band before they ever recorded the first album. I think a couple of his songs are on the first album, but that's interesting that you make that comparison.
Yeah. And it's cool to see like who's been in which band as well, because sometimes I'll find out, oh, this person was in this band, and then I'll find out, oh, these guys all know each other, and it's just one giant family. Really, it's really cool. But with that said, shall I go into the track by track?
Yeah, let's do it.
Sounds good. So I've got What Is the Last Time? It's a really slow and groove-oriented song. A further evolution of the sound that they would move to on Distortion. Green, the title track, it sounds like a mixture of Divine Intervention and Diabolus in Musica era Slayer. And that's a trend that I will see throughout this album. And
I would go so far as to say that they did this shit better than Slayer did, but that's just my opinion.
Yeah, I would say that they definitely dip their toes into the same kind of zone, but I do feel like it fits this band more. Then we get track 3, which is Fat, spelt with a PH for just for that extra little bit of street cred there.
Yep.
The groove influence is firmly in place by this era of the band's history. And it was at this track that I decided to listen to it on YouTube, because the Spotify version, much like certain CD pressings, were from a bad master because it skips horribly.
Oh, shit. I think that used to be the case on Apple Music as well, but I think it's been replaced now. So I don't know why it wasn't replaced on Spotify, but that fucking sucks.
Yeah, it was. I was like, hang on, this is a streaming version. There is no... Like, I thought for a second on the first couple tracks it was like a creative choice.
Yeah, like let's make this very 90s by making it have CD skips.
Yeah, and I was thinking at that point, maybe it was just some kind of odd choice in the studio to add all of this like chopped up digital artifact stuff going on, but then I realized that's a weird thing to choose for a whole album.
Yeah,
because by the time I got to track 3, it was like, dun 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 dun, when like certain things would start skipping, and I thought to myself, this isn't even a CD, so how is it fucking skipping?
It's just because they ripped it from a CD, which is weird. I don't know how that would work. It reminds me though, because bands did that in the 90s. One of my favorite examples of that, there's a song by the Melvins that. In the middle of the CD, it starts to make a skipping CD sound, and it goes on for about 30 seconds, and then a bass line comes up over it, and then he starts singing over it. They use the skipping CD sound as the rhythm for the track, and I'm always like, that is fucking cool. Because the first time I heard it was on CD when I was in the 90s, and I go, oh shit, there's something wrong with my... Oh wait. I like shit like that.
Is that on Houdini? Is that the album?
Yeah, it's on Houdini.
I thought so. Yeah, I like Houdini. It's a damn good album.
Hell yeah!
But yeah, we're talking about Green.
Green.
So I decided to listen to it on YouTube because the YouTube version is better than the one on Spotify, and that is a shocking mistake that someone might have got fired for. I don't know, or maybe reprimanded.
I mean, to be honest, people probably don't even know. Like whoever, I don't know. This band just gets so swept under the rug that I almost feel like whoever delivered the music to Spotify, they probably don't even remember doing it. It's just out there now.
Yeah, it is a pretty. I mean, it is a deep cut album by a deep cut band, so I suppose that's understandable. But still, It sucks that it skips.
Absolutely.
But yeah, and then we get to Turns to Rage, super heavy. I like that track a lot. Face Down Heroes, there's a gnarly triplet section that really got me headbanging. This album is far removed from the first two records, but they do a damn fine job at the 90s groove sound.
Yeah, the thing that I think is interesting about these two 90s albums is the fact that while stylistically you would say that they have nothing in common with the first two, but for some reason they maintain a forbidden sound. I think maybe some of that is the vocalist Russ Anderson, because he's a guy that he didn't really change up what he was doing. He tried different things on this album, but he's the kind of dude, I feel like he could sing over anything. Like he can make anything sound good. And so I think having him as this anchor, and then just the fact that the riffs didn't get so tied down to just one groove. There's a lot of more intricate things on this than there are in most albums that came out in 97. So it's interesting how it feels like a forbidden album, but it also doesn't at the same time.
Yeah, it's a strange one, because you would think that like an album from 97 would just think, screw it, let's just jump onto the nu metal train, that's working. But this still manages to make it extremely, explorative and experimental, and it does keep it interesting.
Yeah.
Then you get Over the Middle. It definitely has a mid to late 90s Slayer feel to it, but with Forbidden's own stamp on it, which is awesome. Like you say, I also agree. I think they did this sound better. Can of Worms, frantic, angry groove metal, keeping the vibe going.
I love that. That's a great song too.
Yeah. Nonsense, spelt with a $sign at the end.
When you're just looking at the song titles, I'd be like, this album probably sucks.
Well, like that's the thing. You could show me like the track listing with zero context, and I would have thought it was a hip hop album. Because some of the things, fat and nonsense spelt with a $sign, that's just like, that's got a certain vibe to it all its own.
But there is no rapping on this album, I'm happy to say. Not that I have a problem with that. I just think a lot of bands threw that in to try to gain some sort of new metal points or something, but they didn't.
Yeah. While we're on the subject of rapping that doesn't belong where it is, there's a Winger song from their second album where Kip Winger fucking raps, and it's 1990, so it's got that like old school hot.
He was ahead of his time, Kip Winger.
Yeah, Kip Winger invented nu metal. All of those kids that all of those kids that dissed Winger because of Beavis and Butthead had a lot to owe to that guy. But then we get, I never said what I liked about Nonsense. It's a punky and visceral track with a groove veneer. Blank was my favorite track on the album. It's a cool, psyched out, vibey, Seasons in the Abyss on acid kind of feel. And it's also the first instance that I can recall of a big 80s snare drum being used in 1997. Like, there's a certain reverb choice on that drum kit that I'm just thinking, this has transported me back at least like 5 or 7 years into the early 90s.
Yeah, because I feel like this album was meant to be an overall kind of experience, so they tried different things on different tracks. Because even vocally, I don't remember, it might be on Can of Worms where Russ Anderson's vocals are very, very different. He almost has a weird shakiness to his delivery that that sounds really interesting. So it's like, a lot of bands did that in the 90s, like tried to create this piece of an audio experience, I guess, with the
Yeah.
technology available at the time. And not that this is, overusing any technology. I mean, there's samples on Over the Middle, but other than that, that's really it.
Yeah, and then finally we get Focus, which is just this nasty riff that got the ultimate Doom guy riff face out of me. I was just thinking, oh fuck, I like this. And I think it's testament to the fact that Forbidden never made a bad album. This just happened to be, I mean, I'm going to be honest here, my ranking could change tomorrow, because a lot of these albums I hold in like a very, very close regard to one another. And the gaps between some of these albums for me is incredibly thin. And honestly, with a repeat listen, they could switch places. But yeah, I already on the bottom pick, I am impressed.
Yeah. I think that that's true about all of the Forbidden albums is I think everyone that's into this band clearly has a favorite, period of the band, but I don't know. I feel like it's if you can't see the quality of all of the albums they made, then I don't know. I feel like your idea of metal is probably pretty narrow. So
yeah.
But yeah, Green's a great album. Are you finished with that one, sir?
I am indeed. I have wrapped up my bottom pick.
Cool. So my bottom pick is not Green, but it is the album right before it, the album Distortion, which came out in 1994, which is the beginning of them taking on the groove elements, and Distortion has a very 90s style production. Very. And it's interesting because they were one of the bands that, from what I've heard, I think it was an interview I saw with the bass player, Matt Camacho, where he was talking about how after they did their second album, they were meeting with major labels to put out their next record. And this was around the time that Nirvana's Nevermind came out. And he talks about how they were meeting with all these bands and their manager was like, hey, hold out for a better deal. Don't take a deal just yet. And then grunge came around, and then all of a sudden, those record labels wouldn't return their phone calls. So, so they were one of those bands that really suffered from that. And so it took them 4 years, from 1990 to 1994, to release another album, and all of a sudden, it's now on. I don't even know the label is Fierce Records, which I've never heard of. So I mean, this is legit indie here. Which is interesting because I've been in bands, but I've never been in a band that could even be remotely considered successful. So I can't even imagine the feeling it would be to feel like you're on your way up and then all of a sudden find yourself down lower than you were when you started. So that is insane. But I think that being said, this album shows maybe that feeling because it is very dark. And it maintains the progressive qualities of Forbidden while taking it into the 90s metal arena, if you will, because it still feels very technical and it's expertly performed. That's the one thing I have to say about all 5 of their albums. It just sounds like a band of really skilled musicians. And I'm going to say this every time I talk about every album. Russ Anderson is one of my favorite metal vocalists ever. He has a thing where his voice sounds huge and commanding, and he can easily they could have done a straightforward sort of crossover thrash style song where he's just shouting, or he could do a power metal thing if he wanted to, and both of them sound very convincing. And he's just an amazing vocalist. And no matter what Forbidden did, he was able to find his way and seamlessly work his vocal style without totally changing it. You still hear his voice very much in all of these albums. And so, yeah, I'll talk about him a lot, I'm sure. But honestly, because of all the things I talked about with like, where they were earlier on in their career and what happened with music, this feels like a natural progression for this particular band. Cause I think that, between their first and second album, there was a progression, and I feel like they were a band that would not have been comfortable with doing a similar album again anyway. So even if they had been signed to a major and made an album 2 years later, I don't think it would have been anything like the first two albums. I think that this is just what this band was destined to do. And really, the only reason why this album is last for me is because I think that there are a few uninteresting moments here and there, but that's nitpicking because there are amazing songs on here. Like my favorite is probably the song "No Reason." "No Reason" is just one of these things that it has like everything that's great about this album all in one song. It's got the groove riffs, it's got melodic guitar parts that you wouldn't normally hear in 90s nu metal kind of shit. And it's got an amazing middle breakdown where you hear like there's a stop in the riff and you hear like they're banging on a trash can lid or something. I don't know what it was that made that sound, but that's just the song on here where I'm like, this is the best representation of this album. But really it doesn't hold my attention the way the other four do. It's still really good. I just think it's nowhere near as good as Green. I think that they would improve on what they're doing here with Green. And I also think it's kind of a testament to how amazing their first two records were, because you listen to this in order, it really does. You really see a shift and you see a divide in the two eras of the band. And I think the fact that they stripped it down for this, it really highlights why those first two Forbidden albums should be held up along with all of the classic thrash metal from the 80s and early 90s. I would even hold it. There are bands that they seem like they're the cool metal bands from that era. Like people like to talk about Violence and I don't know who the fuck am I thinking of? Shit, I don't know. I can't think of another one right now. My brain just I'm so into the Forbidden thing right now. But there were other bands that seem like they're the cool ones to talk about. But I think Forbidden's albums are way better than any of those bands. And so the fact that this one is my last in the list, it doesn't mean a lot. It's still better than I think most music that came out in 1994. It's up there. My only gripes, aside from just a couple of moments where I lose interest, is the bass guitar is too low, but that is a 90s production issue where all of a sudden like everything got squeezed to where the guitars need to be really loud, but also there's no reverb on the guitars, and then the bass needs to be down kind of low, I guess because the guitars themselves, they crank up the bass on the guitars, and it just sounds weird. It's a sound that I've never been into, and I'm glad isn't really done anymore. But and then last but not least, the inclusion of their cover of 21st Century Schizoid Man is unnecessary. Like, there's better covers of this song. They're perfectly capable of pulling off this song, but at that point in the album, I'm like, this album's already long enough. I realize you're filling out a CD, but you don't need to do a cover, an 11-minute cover of a King Crimson song that I think is actually shorter than.
I think it's got a bonus track after some silence.
You're right. You're right. It does. It does. Yeah. So it's still pretty long, but I don't know. I think they could have just left that out. But once again, the fact that I love this band so much, that's a bunch of nitpicking right there, because Distortion is a fucking great album. And it's a great example of the kind of metal that was going on in 94, in my opinion. So, but they did way better albums. And so that's why it's at my number 5.
I think the cover of 21st Century Schizoid Man is on a list of like the top 10 covers of 21st Century Schizoid Man, because there's that many covers of it. Yeah. It warranted a list. But,
I think Voivod did one, and It seems like there's a lot. I mean, and I get it because that's a really great song. That's one of those songs that if you get confident in your guitar playing, then of course you want to cover a song like that. And so
Yeah.
I get it, but once again, they could have left it off.
Cool. So that brings me to my number 4.
Yep.
Cool. So for my number 4, after some thought and deliberation, I decided to go for Omega Wave as my number 4 pick.
The most recent Forbidden album from 2010.
And yeah, it actually came out the same year I became a metal fan.
Nice.
So it took me 10 years to find it, but it's I'm good. I'm getting there. I'm getting there. So yeah. Anyway, Alpha Century, big epic intro track. I really like how this starts. I love where it's going. Like almost as if to say, you know, we're back and we're gonna hit you with something.
Yeah.
But we're gonna tease you a little bit first. We're gonna do this big intro thing like we did on Twisted into Form.
It's a good thing it pays off too, because some bands do that. I hate intros because most of the time it's like, get ready, and then the next song is kind of like, oh, okay. Yeah. But in this case, that doesn't happen.
Yeah, and especially since it's a comeback album and they went back to, well, to an extent, they went back to the thrash thing.
Yeah.
Once Forsaken at the Gates kicks in, it's, oh shit, they're a thrash band again. And it's furious as hell. Then pretty much immediately after it, you get Overthrow, which has echoes of the groove thing they explored in the 90s. So that kind of lets you know, hey, we've made some thrash stuff, but we're not abandoning the journey that we've been on completely.
Yeah. It's a great marriage of the two eras of the band.
Yeah, it's almost as if they took all 4 albums and just said, hey, you're all one thing now.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's pretty much this album, because it fuses all their eras to some extent together. And you get Adapt or Die, which is this thrashing, modern edged little bit of Judas Priest influence in there. But yeah, it's a really cool album because it's almost like a career retrospective. And they've plucked all of the things they liked out of each of their albums and put them in a blender, and this is the thrash metal groove smoothie that you get at the end.
Yeah.
The smoothie analogy.
Yeah, we haven't done the pizza analogy in a while, so maybe we should just move over to smoothies now.
Oh yeah, we're on a bit of a health kick at the minute. We ate too much pizza.
You can never have too much pizza.
Oh hell yeah. So we get Swine. This is my favorite track so far. Real vibey, groovy
song
kind of thing. Yeah, fucking loved that one. And then you get Chatter, which is this spooky interlude. And then you get Dragging My Casket, which is borderline melodic death metal at points and then borderline power metal at others. It's a really interesting song because it's like two extremes of the band's sound that you don't think of but are always subconsciously aware of. Like, it's like you said, he could do real direct nasty yelling stuff, or he could do a power metal thing and get away with it.
Yeah.
And this track here is like kind of the embodiment of that. Hypnosis, reminiscent of their 90s work. Immortal Wounds, laid back into that groove, you know, sorry, my words got a little crossed over there. Blah, blah, blah. But this, like I say, it's like a career retrospective. Behind the Mask. Now, Behind the Mask has a little bit of System of a Down in it, I could hear. Just a little bit of that kind of influence in there, but combined with Forbidden's brand of groovy thrash. Inhuman Race, this heavy plodder of a song. And then finally you get the title track, Omega Wave, which is just this awesome thrash track that just tears off your face to finish the record. And it was at this point in the album that I realized, it's an hour long. It's quite a long album.
Yeah.
But they managed to appropriately fit everything that makes up what their band is, or sadly was in this case. It's a really impressive comeback for a band.
And when you mention, because Omega Wave is just a motherfucker of a song. I love that song so much. And when I knew that you were going into listening to these albums and you were doing it in order, I'm like, just the idea of you starting your journey with Chalice of Blood and then ending it with Omega Wave. I'm just like, I want to do that all again. I want to just wipe my memory and go through it. Because Omega Wave is just such a good song. It's got so many great parts, and then it doesn't even need the killer middle section that it has. It's just they just throw that in because they have more cool shit to do. But yeah, it's an exciting song.
The whole discography is bookended by two phenomenal songs.
Yeah,
and what a way to go out if this is their final album, which is likely.
Yeah, it doesn't look like there's any plans, but you never know. I never say never.
Yeah, let's hope they come back. But
we'll have to see. But apparently, it's from what I've read and heard in interviews, there not all of their hearts were in it. So we're probably just left with these albums, but that's fine. But I'm gonna go ahead and leap off of you because my number 4 is also Omega Wave. And I really don't have a lot to add. I'm sure I can waste a few minutes here talking about what I love about this album. But like we said before, it starts off really strong. And this was a 13-year gap between Green and this album where the band had broken up and then gotten back together. And this is 3 of the original members on this album: Russ Anderson, Craig Locierco. Fuck, I can't. I'm an American, okay? His name's Craig something, and then Matt Camacho on bass. But the whole band they have in this album they're just so good, and this is, to me, this is up there when it comes to old school bands doing albums in the 2000s. This is up there with one of my favorites. Like it's whenever some old school band says, "Hey, we're coming back. Are you excited?" I'll be like, "Well, let's just see," because there's there for every Omega Wave, there's I can't think of an example, but there's a lot of these comebacks that are kind of like, "Oh, okay, I guess." And the thing that's great about this comeback is that, unlike a lot of bands, Forbidden didn't get wrapped up in trying to prove that they were thrash metal again. Like some bands do that. Like even bands that aren't even making a comeback, bands that just sort of made their way into the 2000s. I'm not going to name any names, Overkill, but they just try too hard to constantly be the same thing all the time. And I don't understand that, because that is not what made earlier albums by a lot of these bands cool. And so they didn't do that. They continued what they had already been doing, where they fit into a genre. You could easily call this a thrash metal album, but as you're listening to it, you'll find all these parts where you go, well, that's not a thrash metal part. That is definitely not thrash. That's what Forbidden always did. They didn't play by the rules. They came out of the Bay Area thrash scene, but they were already from album 1 doing their own thing, and they just continued to do it. They came back and did it again. And I don't know, I feel like a lot of the whatever you call it, the praise should be heaped upon Craig, last name I can't pronounce, because I think he does the majority of the music writing, and I feel like he's one of those guys, like he's a James Hetfield, where he just has riffs in his head ready to come out anytime somebody needs him. But there's such a great energy on this album, and 13 years later, Russ Anderson still sounds amazing. And we talked about Swine. Swine is like my favorite song on the album, probably next to Omega Wave. It's just a killer sort of slow tempo jam, which I like that. I want bands to do that. If you can
Yeah.
play really fast, sure, show me that on a few songs and blow my mind. But don't bore the fuck out of me by just keeping your foot on the gas the whole goddamn time.
Yeah.
So, but I also think that this is their most melodic album. Like there's a lot more sort of grand sections where Russ really does kind of a soaring singing vocal over things, whereas a lot of the first four albums, it seemed like there was a lot more aggression, and this one has some of that, but I feel like there's a lot of really big vocal melody parts, and even in the guitars, I think there's a lot more melodic shit going on here. But so why is it at number 4? It's too long, in my opinion. I don't know what songs would be cut. There's a couple that in the middle that aren't as great to me. I really think this song has an amazing first half, and then the last couple tracks are amazing. So maybe they could have left one or two out of there. But the fact that it took them 10 years to make this album, or 13 years to make this album, and we haven't had one in 10 years, all of a sudden that doesn't matter anymore. It's like, oh, we just have extra Forbidden songs now. It's like, I think the album is too long as an album, but as a Forbidden fan, I'm like, yeah, it's okay. Yeah, I'm fine with the link of it now. It's one of those albums that just shows how great a band is. Like if you can not only have a huge gap in between albums, but also coming back as an older band and still produce this level of quality of music, writing and performance wise. I mean, that alone puts this band above a lot of other bands. And if this is their last album, then that's great because we never have to talk about a bad Forbidden album. so yeah, that's my number 4, Omega Wave.
Cool. So for my number 3, I've gone for 1994's Distortion.
All right.
So right off the bat, first track, title track, Distortion, I can already hear a lot of Death influence as in the band, especially in the drums. You know, those kind of like the double kicks with like the syncopated bells and cymbals and stuff, like ting ting, like kind of things.
Yeah.
There's a real groove and heaviness to this album, and like you said, it's very dark. Then you get the kind of, it's almost like a call to arms for groove metal with track 2, hypnotized by the rhythm, because there is a real rhythmic focus not only on this song but the whole album. You know, the focus in the 90s went from, oh, you can play a really fast solo, check this out, I've gone to drop A and I'm just going to play this morbidly obese riff. And that's just the shift that happened in the 90s. You know, low end became a big focus, and having a bouncy, danceable riff is always going to win you points in the groove camp. And I even heard some of the Machine Head-esque harmonics in there as well. You know, the natural beep-boo harmonics in there.
Yeah.
But then we get to track 3, Rape. It took me a second to figure out where the groove was going on this one, but that's a testament to how insanely progressive they could be, even when playing a style that was something that was more stripped back. Mm-hmm. And then the riff comes in, and I'm just living for it. You know, this album, regardless of the placing on this list, is impossible not to headbang to, because it is just one of those primal, gets under your skin. You can't stop yourself from kind of moving, because it's just such a, it really taps into something subconscious. And I feel like that is that is the magic of groove metal. It's just the
Yeah.
ability
When it's
to
done,
make you move.
when it's done correctly, it hits something in your psyche or in your, almost like it's in your spine. It hits something
Yeah.
like in the, whatever, like shoots the bolts of electricity or whatever that go to your brain or whatever. Like it just hits something in there and it makes your body like want to move if you do it
Yeah.
right. You know.
It's like one of my favorite moments in that metal Headbangers Journey documentary series by Sam Dunn.
Yeah.
That the part where they interview Phil Anselmo about the money riff. Was why not make the whole damn song the money riff? And it just, I
That was a pretty good film.
and I just, as soon as I noticed that in every groove song from that point in, I was just like, I've heard stuff like this in thrash, but thrash bands were always really focused on the speed.
Well, with
rather-
thrash, it would have been the mosh part.
Yeah.
So the
Yeah,
groove
for
metal
sure.
was doing a mosh song all the way through.
They did a mosh album. It's just you get No Reason. As a big groove metal fan, I appreciate when a band makes me move and I don't notice it. And it's just, not to mention the cool lead guitar and acoustic stuff going on with the insanely good drumming, and the breakdown in No Reason was sick. Feed the Hand, just a groovy, tasty, heavy song. Wake Up, as far as thrash bands doing groove metal goes, it's damn fine. And I love those sliding down parts in the pre-chorus, the kind of bendy bits, like the meow kind of stuff.
Yeah.
I love guitars like that.
I love bendy riffs.
Yeah.
It makes me happy. I don't know.
Oh, which Pantera song is it? Now I'm thinking of it because is it Pantera? It's like
Oh yeah,
dun 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 bow. I love that song.
I think that's on Far Beyond Driven. I can't remember what song. Is that Shedding Skin that happens in? I don't know, but I know what you're talking about. I love that riff. For some reason, my brain immediately goes to the song. We're not talking about this band right now, but the song with the bendy riff that I feel like they made it just for me because they made most of the song the bendy riff is the song "Check My Brain" by Alice in Chains,
yeah.
where the whole fucking riff is just and it sounds so weird. You listen to that song in headphones and it makes me feel like I'm stoned.
Yeah.
So it's almost like that song came out and I was like, these guys have been listening to me. I think they knew that I wanted this.
It's funny you should say you'd stoned, because when I hear the song Stone by Alice in Chains from like a similar kind of era but one album later, the first time I heard the song Stone, I thought, this is one of the heaviest fucking things I've ever heard.
Yeah.
Just that.
That has a little bit of it too.
Yeah.
You know what? We should talk about Alice in Chains sometime soon.
Yeah,
Hint.
maybe we should. Hintity hint hint.
But today we're talking about Forbidden.
Cool. Mind's Eye, spelt minds with an apostrophe S, and then I is in the letter I. They do a lot of funny spelling stuff during this era.
Yeah, that is almost punishable, that song title. Mine's I get it? Okay, we get it. But it doesn't matter because when you say it live, when you're about to play the song, you can't go, this song is called Mine's I, the letter I in parentheses. Let's go. It's just Mind's Eye. Nobody can hear that.
Yeah. That being said, it's really vibey and psychedelic, and I love that shit. I love when the 90s bands would do real vibey, psyched out stuff. Then you get All That Is. You can definitely hear the 90s influence on this one. Absolutely drenched in that kind of vibe. Undertaker, heavy and doomy, keeping the focus firmly rooted in groove over speed. And then you get 21st Century Schizoid Man, which is, like I said, one of many covers of the song. This one, though, opting to doom it the fuck up. And I remember hearing the original King Crimson version of the song back in 2010 on Guitar Hero 5 at a friend's house. And I didn't like it initially, but 11-year-old me just wasn't ready for prog to blow my mind yet. I had to be eased into music before I understood prog.
Yeah,
but
it's one of those songs that I like it so much because I don't like a lot of King Crimson. I'm not a King Crimson fan, and so most of the time, prog rock, aside from a handful of bands, gets very boring to me. But the reason why I think a lot of people still dig this song so much is because it has this real groovy riff. It starts off with down, and in the King Crimson version, there's like horns on it and shit.
Yeah.
But then you get to the middle where it's all of a sudden switches up to that really busy like, and then it does the little stops with the. It's like it's one of the first times I think I heard a song where I went, how did they know when to stop and when to start and what? Like, so I get why people love it because it's got all of those things all in one song and it's pretty rad.
Yeah. But like I say, it's a damn fine groove metal album. And I really enjoyed this one.
And it's interesting because we're kind of on the same wavelength with our ranking so far, because my number 3 is the album Green from 1997. So we like swapped our groovy albums with each other, and so it's interesting because now we know our top 2 are both going to be the late 80s, early, I guess it's 88 and 90 albums, which that'll be interesting to talk about. But anyway, that's one of the things when we talked about doing this band is that I knew you and I have a lot of like if we're doing a Venn diagram, our circles cross over most of the circle. Like I think it's just a little bit of the circle on the outside where you and I don't meet. And Forbidden seems like a band that fits right in the middle of that circle with the both of us.
Dead center.
So I was real excited, and so this was the album where I go, he's gonna fucking love this because unlike Distortion, where Distortion, I feel like it shows a little bit of we're doing a little bit of what's going on in the 90s. Green to me doesn't sound like that. It has sounds that come from what was going on in the 90s, but no song sounds like another song, and no song goes the place you think the song is going to go, and they don't rely on the same kind of elements that a lot of other bands were doing in 1997. There's a lot of groove on it for sure, but it's like a 90s sound, but it embraces odd song structures and odd time signatures and like discordant guitar parts. It puts all of these things into this, smoothie that I don't think it sounds like any other band in 1997, but at the same time, it sounds very much at home in 1997. And I just think that these guys were able to adapt to whatever was going on in metal and still make it their own. Everybody in the band. And so I think this is the same lineup as Distortion all together. I believe it's all the same dudes. But I think it's more interesting than most of the metal that was happening in 97. Like just me thinking off the top of my head what was going on in metal in 97, nothing pops in. Like I can't think of a great 1997 metal album. I can't think of one.
I can maybe think of a couple, but it's really hard for me because generally speaking, I'm not like a late 90s frequenter, so to say. I don't tend to hang out in the late 90s musically very often, but I can think of a few. One that stands out to me is The More Things Change by Machine Head, but aside from that, it's a really credit where it's due. It's a very honest album. because
Yeah.
I don't feel like it's ripping anything off. I feel like they just took influence from what was going on, but stamped the Forbidden vibe on it.
Yeah. And I think that this album is just one badass moment after another. It you know, it just I don't know. To me, it never gets boring. And once again, I have to give props to Russ Anderson because he really ups his game, in my opinion, because he still delivers the things that you know he's capable of doing, but also there's other parts where he's clearly trying something a little different, but it just sounds natural. He sounds like a guy that just knows how to sing. Like you could bring him into a room, give him any piece of paper with any song on it and be like, do this. And he would just nail it.
Yeah.
So the different approaches and the unique song structures and riffs just make the song make the album totally unique. And it's one of those ones where when I went back to listen to it and I thought, as I was listening to it, I'm like, this might end up being my number 2. I don't really know.
Wow.
And inevitably, it didn't become my number 2. And I had to nitpick, and I guess the last couple tracks aren't as great as the rest of the album, but that's just me trying to find a way to order these fucking things because I think Green is amazing, and it hurts me even more because people already don't talk about the classic Forbidden albums enough, but this is one that I feel like it's just forgotten about. Like it's like even when you go to the Wikipedia, the description of it just says the 4th studio album by American thrash metal band Forbidden. That is it. That's all it says.
It feels forgotten.
And it sucks because a lot of these albums are the ones that I want to know all about. Like, I'm so nerdy, I want somebody to do the research or interview the band, and I want to just put together a book of like all these sort of forgotten albums and what went into making them, the mindset of the band, what was going on in music at the time, because it's also interesting to me, especially when you're able to nail it with a really fucking great album. And this, I mean, I feel like metal in general from the mid 90s to I don't know, maybe 2005. Like I feel like there was a lot of uncertainty with metal because metal wasn't the big thing it was anymore, and I think everyone was kind of hurting from that. And then eventually in the 2000s, I think everybody came out the other end thinking, all right, well now we're going underground again, and the underground became big again. But not as big as it was. And so just the fact that this album came out of that time period and it sounds so inspired, it just makes it one that I want to sing the praises of all the fucking time. And that's at my number 3, Green.
Awesome.
Okay, so that brings us to our top 2 albums.
Holy shit. Well, we both know that it's between 2 albums for the both of us.
Yeah.
But the question is, who is going to take the top spot? That's going to be a. I always like when you and I match up with our last 2 because it's always kind of like, who's going to pick what? But this was hard for me because.
Yeah, I agree. Very hard.
The first 2 albums bring a consistency but a uniqueness to each one. The first one being the rawer, more thrashy affair, and Twisted into Form being the more technical and tighter album. But, you know, I had to put one at number 2.
Unfortunately.
So, after much thought and very hard thinking, I went for Forbidden Evil as my number 2.
All right, the debut.
And I knew, because I did this fully chronologically, and I'd never heard any Forbidden up until we did this, did research for this episode.
Yeah.
My introduction to this whole thing was Chalice of fucking Blood. What an amazing fucking song that was.
Yeah.
That's the iconic "Welcome to the Church of Lies."
Yeah, just the 1-2 punch of Chalice of Blood into Off the Edge.
Oh my God.
Both of those songs, it's just blowing your wad immediately on this fucking album. It's so good.
Like, Off the Edge is just such a frantic, violent, psychotic assault of a song. You get Through the Eyes of Glass. Shows off a slightly more melodic take while retaining the brutality of the previous tracks. Really shows off the vocals too. And then we get the title track, Forbidden Evil. God damn, this is fucking epic. Like,
Which, if you didn't know, was the band's original name. Forbidden Evil was originally the band's name, and then they just became Forbidden. But they named their album Forbidden Evil. It's like Testament.
Yeah,
it's called The Legacy.
It's exactly the same as what happened with Testament. I just thought of that. But the title track, I actually wrote, I write my notes as I listen to the album, and I write exactly what I'm thinking in my head, and I've just got "fuck me sideways," and I can hear both Priest and Maiden influence, but with a heavy thrash paint job, and it's good. Oh man, I had my mind blown by both of these records.
Yeah, and since you're about halfway through, it's important to point out that the drummer on these first two albums was none other than Paul Bostoff, who would end up being in Slayer and other bands.
Yeah,
but he's the drummer on these first two albums.
Stellar musicianship all round. March into Fire. So far, this album has consistently melted my face. I'll definitely be buying a physical copy of this bad boy. Feel No Pain. Any metal song that starts with the sounds of war already sets an excellent tone for the violence that waits around the corner, because it is just such a visceral, unrelenting album. And
it's always interesting to me how bands, because you know that it was just great minds thinking alike because they came out the same year, but like that, and then Metallica with One was also in '88 with the war sounds at the beginning. And I know it's not a big stretch to put that before a metal song, but that's not the only time it happens. There are other cases of two bands putting out an album the same year and having a similar idea. It's almost like it's in the air.
Yeah.
Wherever these dudes, or whatever drugs these dudes were on, it was giving them the same ideas. But I don't know. I like little things like that.
Hell yeah. As Good as Dead is tight, virtuosic, and controlled, yet chaotic and nasty, which is Forbidden pretty much summed up. It's controlled but chomping at the bit to just it's so fucking nasty. And then finally, Follow Me, building up intensity with a bit of a proggy intro before going into this evil, menacing thrash song. And this album has just it's so raw but produced exactly how it needed to sound. It's big, it's imposing, and it's just angry and hungry, and it really shows that I agree this band deserves way more recognition.
Yeah,
especially today, because God, what an awesome album. And that's not even the top pick for me. So yeah.
And are you done here?
I am done with Forbidden Evil.
Well, we're not done with Forbidden Evil because it is also my number 2.
Hey,
which was rough because these two albums, they switched places quite a bit.
Yeah.
And so at the end of the day, this one, I guess because it's has a little more of a rough edge to it, and the one we'll talk about later doesn't really have that. But also, I think that's kind of a great quality of this album. This sounds like a young, hungry band who had so much aggression and energy in them, but at the same time were just already killer musicians and songwriters. There's the songwriting on this album is far beyond most bands at 1988 and at album number 1.
Yeah.
There are things on this album that you would later hear bands trying to do in 1990 and 91. Like they were already doing it. And I don't even know. It's interesting because I mean, I realized that Rob Flynn was involved and he co-wrote, I don't know, 3 or 4 of the songs, something like that. But I don't know how much stock to put in Rob Flynn being involved in bands that are good because I don't really like Machine Head, and Machine Head has done more bad music than they have good music.
Ooh.
And I mean, they have. And so I don't really know how much to trust that he was the guy that boosted this band on their way. You know, same thing with Violence. I'm like, how much was Rob Flynn really to blame for the greatness of that band? Because he's, you know, not involved with that band now. But anyway, that's just me going off on a tangent because I think that these guys just fucking nailed it with the first album, and it's just, like we said before, Chalice of Blood is already an amazingly strong song, and then it's just followed up by Off the Edge. That it's you know, if we did a top 10, you know, 1-2 punch of an album at the beginning, that this would be up there for me.
Yeah.
And the thing that I like a lot about, we've talked about this with Forbidden, and it's apparent even on their first album, is that they fit in very well with thrash metal, but they weren't confined to the same boundaries that a lot of other bands seem to be confined. A lot of bands seem to just have this narrow road they were all going down, and even if they fucking killed at doing what they were doing, there wasn't a lot of wiggle room, whereas Forbidden seemed never afraid to take whatever kind of little turn they wanted to take. And it's such like it's like an aggression plus progression is this album. It's I feel like it's very unique. And it's unpredictable, but I think every Forbidden album has a lot of unpredictable moments on it. And yeah, I really do think that this album becomes number 2. It's hard to explain. I think it comes down to a matter of taste, I think. Because this one feels more like these guys had these songs in them, and they had included all these elements of all of this music that they loved, all of these different metal subgenres. You can hear little bits in there, and it's almost like these songs were so ready to be out there, they sort of just leap out of the band, and there's an urgency and a almost like it's untamed.
Yeah.
And so I like it more when the a band seems like they've really spent time with the songs, kind of shaping them into better versions of what they initially are. This just feels like this is initially how these songs came out, and they just happen to be fucking amazing. And so I always, as much as I love that sort of young, hungry energy, I really do like it when a band puts out a second album and there's such a confidence and there's such a clear direction and idea of what they want to do that it almost seems effortless in what they're doing. And so this one, with all of its twists and turns and complicated riffs and amazing vocals from Russ Anderson, I feel like they hone it all in and get better on the next album we're going to talk about. But Forbidden Evil is one of those albums. It's in my top 10 thrash metal albums ever made.
Yeah.
And it is ridiculous. It hurts to put it at number 2, but here it is. But yeah, that's all I got to say.
That's the thing, though, with this discography is that none of the albums, to me, drop anywhere lower than great. You know,
Yeah.
I consider all five of these great, with the two at the top being phenomenal, like
Yeah.
absolutely unparalleled. And I suppose with that, that leads us into both of our number one,
Number ones
which is Twisted into Form.
from 1990.
Yeah, so this is, obviously 1990 is still kind of the 80s, really. It's still got the 80s feel to it. It's not like it got to New Year's 1989 and they decided, oh, hey, no more reverb. It did take a few years for that kind of production to fall out of favor.
No, it wasn't like they were having a big party with their 80s hair bands and all of a sudden a guy with a sweatshirt and a flannel comes walking in the door. Sorry guys, party's over.
You had your decade, move over. But it's a fucking phenomenal album. Parting of the Ways, you get this pretty acoustic intro, something many thrash bands do to show that they can do more than go just really fast all the time. And it really sets an evolved tone for the record, because the first album just comes straight in with whereas this is this completely opposite end of the spectrum neoclassical acoustic thing, which leads directly into Infinite. And coming right off of the bat, this already feels tighter, more technical as a result. The riffs are fucking rad. And every choice in this song is exactly what it needs. And it's just this... It almost feels like if And Justice for All was produced right at times. Because it's like that kind of technical thrash with just enough beef to give it that real punch. Out of Body, Out of Mind, excellent thrash song. Step by Step, excellent thrash song with cool, interesting turns. Twisted into Form, slower yet incredibly impressive track. Love the vocals. He is like a mix of Rob Halford and Bruce Dickinson, I feel sometimes, with kind of gritty thrash overtone. But god damn, like this,
he hits that middle point. I always try to explain what I like out of a thrash metal vocalist, because I don't necessarily just want them to shout all the time, but I also don't want them to be all the fucking time either. I like that thing that's right somewhere in the middle, which is why I like, Joey Belladonna, because Joey Belladonna could do, he does more things where it's more kind of shouting in key, but he also sings. And then Russ Anderson, fucking Phil Rind from Sacred Reich, like they all have that quality where they fit right in the middle, and they can do either one of those styles. Well, I guess Phil probably doesn't do never did the high thing, but he could still sing. But I don't know. I just love that. I think that it's all of my favorite thrash bands have that middle ground quality in the vocals.
It's very much like singing like this and then leading into a and then it's pretty much that. And I love vocalists that can pull off that, really sinister thing here and then just operatic as hell. And it's so cool to see someone just absolutely snarling and then all of a sudden bust out this bellowing scream. And I'm like, sat there thinking, God, there are some people in life that are just genuinely impressive. It's like you look at these people and you think,
and a lot of them are in this band.
You got R.I.P., which really shows off melody and speed simultaneously. Incredibly intense, and it's a big ass sprawling track. Then you get Spiral Depression, another acoustic and melodic interlude, and a damn cool one at that. Tossed Away feels very, very Testament to me. That track gives off
I'd go with that.
a big Testament vibes. And then finally, One Foot in Hell. This laid back, nasty groove. Love it. I was worried, actually, that this album wouldn't live up to its predecessor and that my ranking would just be me saying the order of the albums in reverse. But I was pleasantly surprised that despite their short discography, they really took me on a journey, and every single one of their albums is both unique and consistent because it still has the Forbidden vibe to it.
You said a couple really important things. The journey is very important. I've said this a lot, where I like bands that take me on a journey with their discography. I don't want to hear different versions of the same thing 10 times.
Yeah.
And also earlier you said the word evolve, and I think that's perfect. I think that's a word I was searching for, and it didn't come into my brain, because between Forbidden Evil and Twisted into Form, there is an evolution, and that's what I love. My number one, obviously, is also Twisted into Form.
Yeah.
And that's one of the big reasons, because Kill 'Em All into Ride the Lightning, major evolution. And I love Ride the Lightning. All the great bands, their second albums, even if they killed it with the first album, the second album is an evolution. Whether or not we end up thinking it's as good as the first album is depending on the group, but all of the best bands give you something different the second time around.
Yeah.
It's especially when you get into the 80s with the 80s metal bands, thrash metal, into what happened in the early 90s. I think a lot of bands, I think that there was almost a respect for the fans and the audience that was different back then.
Yeah.
Because I feel like respect for your audience now is supposed to be, you better give us the same exact thing again, or we're going to get real mad at you for not being thrash enough, or whatever. Whereas it almost seemed like back then they were treating us like we were smarter and we had more of a refined taste, which I feel like people like you and me, we do. I don't think I'm being boastful when I say that. I think that
I would consider us connoisseurs of this subject.
I would never use that word, but I'll take it. But so I that's what I expect from a band. If you are an amazing band, don't give me the same shit again, even if it's great, because it's, at the end of the day, it's not going to be as satisfying. And so Twisted into Form is this thing where it's a cleaner, more progressive affair than Forbidden Evil, but it's still got such a precision and aggression in the performances. Last album with Paul Bostaff on drums before he left. He joined Slayer, obviously, as everybody knows, after this.
Yeah.
When they did, well, I guess it was a few years before they did Divine Intervention.
It's funny, actually, because if you look at the release years for Slayer, 88, 90, 94, that's all the same. They had their albums at the same years. That's
true, they did. And really, I mean, in 88, it seemed like between 88 and 88, 89, 90, it seemed like that was a time period where a lot of these bands were putting out what would be considered their progressive albums. Like you had Injustice for All.
Yep.
I always mention Sacred Right because they're one of my favorites, but with The American Way, that's a very progressive album.
Great album.
Flotsam and Jetsam got way more progressive around this point. Like you name it. If they were a killer band, like some didn't, I guess Testament really didn't do that, and Exodus didn't do that. But some people who are fans of those bands think that that's what makes them great, is that they didn't progress. But I guess they progressed in their own way. But these are more interesting albums to me, and Twisted into Form is just a super entertaining album. It never gets boring. It's just the Infinite into Out of Body, Out of Mind. That's another good like 1-2 punch of this album. Both those songs are so fucking good, and I really do think that overall, even though there's less speed on this album, there's still so many heavy riffs. And I like the fact too that if we go back to Forbidden Evil for a second, they were doing more groovy type stuff on that album already.
Yeah.
When I think a lot of bands weren't doing that, and they kind of continued that onto this one. Now, obviously, it doesn't get groove to the point we would get with Distortion, but it's definitely got those moments on there. It's got money riffs, as Phil would say. But I think a good characteristic of this album is that it feels like the songs have more room to breathe, and you're able to sort of hear. There's a maturity. You can hear all of how great everyone's performances are. Everyone is just bringing their A game, and you're able to pick all of that out on this album. I guess some of that has to do with the production also. But this ends up number one because it's a great example of a great band putting out an even better album than their first amazing album. And so I don't really know what else to say about it. It's just it's an album that between Forbidden Evil and Twisted Into Form, these are the two albums that make it unfathomable to use a really big word, that these guys aren't talked about. They should be talked about. Just these two albums alone should be talked about more than most thrash bands. Yeah. I can understand why a band like this wasn't in the big four, because they didn't have the longevity and the album sales and the global reach that those four bands did. But I think that I don't know. I just think that there's a level of quality and originality to these albums that they should be albums that everybody talks about. When anyone mentions thrash metal, one of these two first albums should be one of the ones that you're talking about, because it's that, because thrash metal wasn't just one note.
Yeah.
They're well, it is now, but but it wasn't then. And this is, I think, the best example of that progressive side of thrash metal. I don't think it got much better than this. There were other great bands doing progressive style thrash, but I don't think anyone did it better than this. So there you go. Awesome.
So yeah, that is our rankings for the band Forbidden.
Forbidden. If there are any of you out there who aren't aware of this band and you're into 80s thrash metal and that whole sort of time period of what was going on musically, I think that this is a piece of the puzzle that you were missing.
Yeah,
and
I definitely was.
Yeah, and I like that we tackled this a lesser known band with a smaller discography, and I guess the only other band that you would equate with smaller and less known would be, we did Ugly Kid Joe, which is like,
yeah,
it's like the opposite side of the metal world from Forbidden, I think. But as much as it was fun to dig into a band like Judas Priest with all of this shit,
yeah,
it almost seems more rewarding to talk about a band that there aren't already 100 videos and podcasts out there talking about them. It's like, I feel like we're doing we're providing a service.
Yep.
We're being helpful to the metal community here.
For sure. Yeah. It's it feels good to talk about bands that, you asked, if you asked a casual listener, they probably wouldn't have any clue who Forbidden was. So getting to talk about a band like this is really fun, because not only does it introduce me to new music, but it adds to my knowledge too. And there might be a Forbidden episode of thrash metal history down the line.
Ooh, that would be really cool.
I'm really going to start putting my focus towards that kind of stuff, because I find that over time, those are the videos on my channel that tend to do the best. So, Yeah.
Yeah, because I think that there's always people discovering these bands, even the really big bands. Like you're going to be doing Black Sabbath, correct?
Yep.
Like I feel like that's a band that every year there are kids discovering Black Sabbath.
Yeah.
And so I think that's evergreen, talking about groups like that. I feel very happy that I will be dead before bands like that are forgotten about. Because if we survive as a human race for another million years, eventually nobody's going to talk about this music that we're talking about. Like it'll be a completely forgotten
fringe niche group. Like
it'll be like archaeology and shit.
Yeah.
it'll be like, how bizarre would that be?
Yeah.
But I don't want to live in that world, so that's fine. I'll hang out here for another 30, maybe 40 years if I'm lucky, and then I'll peace out and leave the mess to everybody else. So that's it for this episode of Cranked and Ranked. Thanks for listening. Eddie, do you have any parting words for this episode?
Anybody that watches me on my channel, I will be shooting the Black Sabbath history soon. The main reason I can't go there right now is as a result of complications with the coronavirus. I've not got it, don't worry. My grandparents haven't got it. But my studio is at my grandparents' house. That's where my drum kit and green screen and everything is. It's kind of built as an extension onto their house. But yeah, I've got another week to wait from seeing someone from a different area. So I've decided to quarantine for a while because they are from a slightly worse hit area. I will be shooting the video soon though. It's just been quite a lengthy process because the script took way longer to write than I expected.
Yeah.
Because
I mean, at this point, we know you're being safe and not being lazy.
Yeah.
So, that's fine. I don't think anyone with half a brain isn't going to fault you for not wanting to bring coronavirus to your grandparents. So.
Yeah, it's just I have this thing in me telling me, you got to make that video, dude. But then I remember I can't. And I really want to do it. And that's the problem. I'm trapped right now.
Yeah. Well, it'll be worth it. The wait will be worth it, folks. And as always, if you're listening to this on YouTube, if you look down in the video description, and there'll be a link to Eddie's channel. And if you're listening to this as a podcast, which you can, I had somebody comment on our last video saying, hey, you should put this up as a podcast on Spotify. I'm like, yeah, it's there. You can go anywhere you listen to podcasts and you should be able to find Cranked and Ranked. So depending on whether you actually want to see album covers in front of your face while we're talking about these, that's for you guys on YouTube. And if you want to take this with you on the go and you don't really care, then we are out there. We are out there for your podcast listening pleasure. And so, So that being said, let's keep this one brief. Every once in a while, we need a quick, energetic one to clear the palate. And we're going to be coming back next time with another, not necessarily big discography, but one that I think needs a little more time.
Yeah.
And love. So yeah, we're not going to tell you what that is, but there was a hint somewhere in this episode. If you're one of the beautiful people who listened to the whole episode, then you may have gotten that hint. But that's all I got. And once again, thank you very much for listening or watching this, however you're taking it in. We appreciate it. Make sure you're commenting. If you're somebody who does listen to this on the podcast and that's all you're doing, and you want to send us something, you can send an email to oldheadpodcast@gmail.com and send me your hate mail or some ideas or some praise or some dick pics, like whatever you feel like sending. Don't send me any dick pics, but I mean, I don't know. Maybe I'll rate it. I'll rate your dick and send it back to you and let you know what I think about it. But overall, I'm not a yeah, cranked and wanked. That is amazing. I'm not a fan of dicks in general, so you may not get a good rating from me, but feel free. Anyway, all right, before I go too far into this weird, whatever the fuck it is that's happening, I'm going to sign off. So thank you very much for listening. We'll be back again next week. Eddie, take us out.
Later, dude.